How do you fare, my loyal 9 patriots? Have you ever wondered how many of the most prominent, most influential, and most un-American pro-communist radicals seem to have a never-ending supply of fiscal support? Well, get ready, because I'm going to show you the deep state, the swamp, the Uni-Party that President Trump was referring to, because together, we are going to expose them, we are going to spread the message, and we are going to take this country back. So let's get started. Let me begin by telling you this. Since the Spanish-American War in 1898, every red-blooded American in this country has been slowly becoming more and more enslaved. And the very people that assisted in the birth of communism, the slow deterioration of the middle class by the mass transfers of wealth, and the endless wars that have resulted in millions of flag-draped caskets are none other than the, quote, think tanks. But more specifically, it is the tax-exempt group known as the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR for short. And if you are unfamiliar with this organization, don't worry, you're not alone, because there is a reason you haven't heard of them, which we will cover in this video. However though, even people that are somewhat familiar with the CFR have a false sense of reality on the true nature of the CFR. If we look at the CFR's website, they claim to be an independent, nonpartisan membership organization, think tank, a publisher dedicated to being a resource for its members, government officials, business executives, journalists, educators, and students, civic and religious leaders, and other interested citizens in order to help them better understand the world and the foreign policy choices facing the United States and other countries. They claim to take no institutional positions on matters of policy. Let me translate this statement for you. They are not an independent organization. They are partisan, and every group they listed for being a resource for is just a group they have infiltrated and subverted from within. Remember, the issue is never the issue. And when a communist accuses you of something, more than likely, it's because they're doing it themselves. But let's dive deeper and get a quick snapshot on the CFR's founding and purpose so we can better understand the sinister nature of this communist organization. Since their inception in 1921, they have been consistently trying to form a world government. One of the primary catalysts behind their creation was the US Senate patriotically voting not to join the Globalist League of Nations, which has since been rebranded as the United Nations, which of course the United States is part of, no thanks to the communist president FDR making the creation of the UN one of his top priorities. And to solidify the point that the CFR has been a globalist organization from the start, the first meeting the UN held in San Francisco, 47 of the American delegates were CFR members. And if you believe those numbers are high, just wait till we get to the more modern CFR government employment numbers, especially with the Biden-Harris Junta numbers. But if we venture to the CFR's website, they recently created a video celebrating their 100 years. In the video, they deliberately described their founders as, quote, white Northeastern men. But what is incredible is the hubris of the CFR. They admit that, quote, early members focused on behind-the-scenes influence. Almost sounds like an unelected shadow government. But let's take a look at their board members. Of course, we see left-wing ideologue after left-wing ideologue, like David Rubenstein, who is co-founder and co-executive of Carlyle Group. He sits on the board at the World Economic Forum. Remember, the group that is part of the Great Reset, the whole you'll own nothing and be happy? You'll be conditioned to eat bugs? Yeah, that World Economic Forum. But we see others like Blair Efron, Nicholas Bem, Ash Carter, the former Secretary of Defense, who said the best military leaders he has seen are transgender. And of course we see their president, Richard Haas, which we will discuss later on in the video. But then we also see someone like Fareed Zakaria, the Trump-hating CNN propagandist. But this is just the tip of the iceberg with the CFR. Now let me show you some real insight on how the deep state operates with someone who you've probably never heard of, Afsani Beschloss. Beschloss' background involves working for JP Morgan, the World Bank, and Carlyle Group. She also sits on many other globalist, anti-American boards, such as the PBS Foundation, Bretton Woods Committee, Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, Gavi for short, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Ford Foundation, and many others. But let's take a quick look at Gavi. Right on their homepage, you are immediately hit with pro-COVID vaccine propaganda. But look at who they are partnering with: Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, World Health Organization, UNICEF, and naturally, the World Bank. But to really highlight how all these organizations are colluding with each other, let's look at the company Beschloss is the CEO and founder of, Rock Creek. And if we look at the advisory board, we begin to see a common theme, and see if you can catch it, starting with Laura Tyson. She's a CFR member and worked for the Clintons. Deanne Julius worked for the World Bank, the IMF, the CIA, the Chatham House, which is a counterpart to the CFR, the United Nations, and a Chinese investment corporation. We also have Alan Greenspan, who's a CFR member, former chief of the Federal Reserve. Then we have Jessica Einhorn, CFR member, World Bank, and worked for the Rockefellers. Then Caroline Atkinson, CFR member, worked for Google, Obama, and the IMF. Liaquat Ahmed, who worked for the World Bank, is not a CFR member, but has won multiple awards from the CFR and writes articles in their journal titled Foreign Affairs. And if we move on to the leadership of Rock Creek, they all have similar backgrounds, with the common theme being prior employees of the World Bank. But to sum up the advisory board and leadership of Rock Creek, they are all globalists who are either CFR members, prior employees of the World Bank, the IMF, or all of them. And I am sure they are all trustworthy individuals that are not manipulating markets to steal from the poor to give to the rich. But as I mentioned before, the CFR produces a journal titled Foreign Affairs, and they boast that that journal made it to the desk of Vladimir Lenin, one of the primary driving forces behind communism, mass murder, and they talk about it as if it's an accomplishment. And if we look at the 1959 position paper entitled Study Number 7, Basic Aims of U.S. Foreign Policy, the document proposed that the U.S. should seek to build a new international order and propose steps that maintain and gradually increase the authority of the UN. Even former members like U.S. Navy Admiral Chester Ward, who was a CFR member for 16 years, stated, quote, "The main purpose of the Council on Foreign Relations is promoting the disarmament of U.S. sovereignty and national independence and submergence into an all-powerful one-world government." Which makes sense if we take into account what their current president, Richard Haas, has stated concerning nation-states. Quote, "They must be prepared to cede some sovereignty to world bodies if the international system is to function." Or he has even simply stated, quote, "The future is global," which makes sense why they loathe the statement America first. But this isn't the first time top-tier CFR members have said similar things. Looking at John Foster Dulles, who was an American diplomat with the UN and Secretary of State under Eisenhower, Dulles stated, quote, "The United Nations represents not a final stage in the development of world order, but only a primitive stage. Therefore, its primary task is to create the condition which will make possible a more highly developed organization." Translation: have the CFR and other globalist organizations create more war, enslave populations via means of taxation, aka theft, and destroy national sovereignty. And without fail, Dulles was a Republican, which gives rise to the next point, the Uni-Party. I want you to imagine a location on a map. That location is claimed to be a place of hope, change, more jobs, less taxes, or my favorite, Jeb. But that location is a trap. In reality, it is filled with murder, enslavement, and communism. That is because both sides are simply leading the American people to a false location on the map, with the only difference being the route they take. That is the Uni-Party. The Uni-Party has existed much longer than we realize. If we examine the globalist chameleon Wendell Willkie, he was born in 1892 and was a Democrat until 1939, where he then switched to the Republican Party and was often referred to as a, quote, liberal Republican. Willkie even tried to start a liberal party, which seems pretty oxymoron if you ask me. But in 1940, the Democrat, or in all honesty, the communist presidential nominee, FDR, was interested in having Willkie be his vice president. Willkie was a globalist and he believed in a, quote, one world, which was actually the name of his book, and he believed, quote, the world was ready for this sort of world government. And of course, a CFR member, Stuart M. Patrick, even wrote an article praising Willkie's globalism and without surprise was bashing Trump in the process. And yet the CFR claims to be a nonpartisan organization. Essentially, the CFR, since FDR and Willkie's existence, the Uni-Party has been the frontrunner of almost every presidential election until President Trump arrived on scene. But more recently, we saw the Uni-Party emerge more overtly between Romney and Obama. In my opinion, this is a classic case of Hobson's choice, which is defined as, quote, a free choice in which only one thing is actually offered. In essence, an illusion of choice. This is where the term take it or leave it originated from, or in more modern times, vote for the lesser of two evils. Moving on though, Romney claimed that Obamacare needed to be repealed and replaced, yet in Massachusetts, he had his own Romneycare plan passed into law, with the difference between the two plans being incredibly slim. But you have to bear in mind, some of the differences are due to one being a state plan and the other being a federal plan. Even David Axelrod, a former chief strategist for Obama, claimed that Obamacare was modeled after Romneycare. Of course, this could be a political attack strategy, but at the same time, comparing the two plans, I unfortunately will have to agree with Axelrod the communist. In the documentary Shadow Ring, link in the description if you want to learn more about the CFR's history, Ben Swan is describing a moment when he interviewed Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan. During the interview, he noticed either Romney or Ryan looking at a man on the couch adjacent to the three. Ben noticed that it was almost like the candidates were getting baseball signals from that man on the couch on how to answer the questions Ben was asking. That man on the couch was from the CFR. But if Hobson's choice actors of 2012 were taking their orders from the CFR, who else was? Well, let me spell it out for you. Since the council's founding in 1921, 21 secretaries of defense or war, 19 secretaries of treasury, 17 secretaries of state, and 15 CIA directors have hailed from the Council on Foreign Relations. Here are some more notable members. You might be able to recognize some of them. Chelsea Clinton, H.R. McMaster, Jeffrey Epstein, who was a member from 1995 to 2009 and donated $350,000 to them and was still a member even after he was charged with solicitation of sex from a minor. We also have Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Stacey Abrams, who is also a Bilderberger, Mikhail Gorbachev, John McCain, Dianne Feinstein, Maya Harris, who is Kamala Harris's sister, Dick Cheney, George H.W. Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, Colin Powell, and one of my personal favorites, Armand Hammer, who is a Soviet spy and was awarded the Order of Lenin and has close ties with the Gore family. But it all makes sense on why John J. McCloy, a former Wall Street banker and lawyer who was chairman of the CFR from 1953 to 1970, stated, quote, "Whenever we needed a man, we thumbed through the roll on the council members and put through a call to New York. Remember from my previous video, I explained a method of subversion they use, and I quote, once a government post has been attained, the conspirators are required to promote a steady infiltration of the government by their fellow conspirators." The last example I will give on the Uni-Party is Doug Ducey, governor of Arizona. The same governor who has abandoned President Trump, the citizens of Arizona, is resisting the election audit and appears to be looking out for himself and his Chinese masters. In a video he did with China Daily, which is a Chinese communist media organization, Ducey is praising China, welcoming China to help with defense and infrastructure projects, and gloats that Arizona is exporting $1 billion worth of product to China, but purchasing $2 billion from China. Remember, treason equals profit. And if you want to watch the full video, the link is in the description. I want you to be thinking about this quote as we discuss the Biden-Harris Junta administration. Dictators will often hold elections to appear democratic. Now, do you remember the infamous video where Biden was bragging about how he was able to withhold U.S. foreign aid from Ukraine if they didn't fire the prosecutor that was investigating the corrupt energy company Burisma? The same Burisma that employed Hunter Biden and was paying him $83,000 a month despite being utterly unqualified for the position. Well, look at who Biden is talking to, none other than Richard Haass, president of the CFR. But what many news organizations missed, except the New American, that in the beginning of the interview, Haass introduced himself and remarked that he worked for the CFR. And Biden, who was sitting next to Haass, said, quote, "And I work for Richard." Many truth is spoken in jest. Hillary Clinton even stated when the CFR opened an office right in the heart of D.C., quote, "We get a lot of advice from the council," she claimed. "So this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing, and how we should think about the future. The CFR has been in the American government for so long that they believe the American people work for them and they own the American government. Why else are 17 out of 30 members of Biden's cabinet are members of the CFR, and many more have close relations to the CFR, including Kamala Harris, whose sister is a CFR member. This isn't a coincidence. Why do you think Biden almost never gets negative media attention, and President Trump to this day is still receiving nothing but negative media attention? Because journalists, news personalities, and even CEOs are members of the CFR, like Jeffrey Bukes, who is the Time Warner CEO until 2018. Time Warner is the parent company of the most trusted name in news, CNN. The masterminds behind this great conspiracy have absolute control of all our mass communications media, especially television, the radio, the press, and Hollywood. And before we close to the solution, I want you to take a good look at this map. Notice the location of the CFR, the IMF, World Bank, the State Department, Gavi, and even Rock Creek. You might be wondering, how do we solve this issue? Unfortunately, this problem is bigger than I could have ever dreamed of, but there are steps we can take to bring these people down. Because even though the election was stolen from President Trump and the 75+ million Americans that voted for him, one positive comes from the Oval Office heist: the exposure of the deep state and the Uni-Party. Number one, we need to have a shift in how we think. We must understand that we are at war. Number two, we need to brand the left with the actual symbol they represent, the hammer and sickle, starting with Jen Psaki. Number three, we need to remember that the longer we remain ignorant, the longer the citizens of this great country will continue to bleed. Lastly, we need to engage in counter-influence operations, engage in conversation with complete strangers, drop hints to them about certain topics that will spark them to discover information for themselves. Because right now, I am issuing you a virtual red pill license. Now start dispensing them to everyone. Oil 9 out.